We are study skills peer coaches working with the UTSC's Academic Advising and Career Center, and today we'll be presenting how to use planners and organization for time management. My name is Kautar, and I'm a second-year study skills peer coach, second-year student working as a study skills peer coach alongside my peer Sophie. If you want to introduce yourself.
Hi guys, my name is Sophie. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm also a second year student, as well as a peer coach, and I am in the neuroscience program.
All right, so what we want to begin with is a very strong basis in understand yourself. This may not seem as intuitive when it comes to organization and time management, but we do believe it's very crucial in academics and everything, basically. So what we wanted to talk about here is kind of creating a list of your strengths and weaknesses. Since this is an academic presentation, we're making this academic in focus. When you do this, you should kind of narrow down your focus. And in this, it involves creating a sort of case study of, or sort of point two study. So we're in our second semester. If you want to talk about your previous fall semester, that's good. The example here is I'm a second year student. So the points I wrote here were from my first year of university. And here, it's not kind of your run off the mill strengths and weaknesses, like I'm good at this, I'm bad at that, but a very in depth understanding of why you have certain weaknesses, what the root causes are, and how you can fix them. The same goes for strengths and understanding the root causes of why you're good at certain things and how you can implement them to either rectify your weaknesses or create entirely new healthy studying habits. So, that kind of goes under your things to consider. You should understand what works and why of your strengths. So an example for myself is, I'll continue with the weakness first, and what doesn't work and why not. So one huge weakness that I had last year was kind of that lack of attention, concentration. I'd waste time rewatching a lot of lectures because I could just never pay attention to whatever the professor was saying. In that, since if you are that vague, since lack of concentration is such a huge issue, if that's your problem too, you need to get very in depth, and rarely ever is there one root cause. There could be multiple factors. So one thing for myself is that I realize I just can't concentrate when it comes to watching lectures at home, or if I'm in person for a lecture, sitting in the back row makes myself distracted very easily because I'm more susceptible to selecting a different tab on my laptop. So kind of figure out why those weaknesses exist and how you can implement them as strengths. So one of the things in the strengths column that I have is that my best studying is done when I'm not at home. So I'd study a lot either at my nearby public library or on campus. And even if I only had one class that day, I'd kind of just finish the class and spend the rest of my day in the UTSC library in a particular spot that I liked. Kind of zoning in while obviously giving myself breaks. So this is why it's good to understand that root cause. You can apply it to other factors as well. Based on this, you need to understand what needs to be slightly adjusted and what needs to be removed altogether. So in that same example of lack of concentration, in terms of adjustments, I like the going to in-person lectures. One other pathway I could have taken is understanding that I get too distracted by my classmates around me, so maybe I should just focus solely on online lectures. If that's the case, that's completely fine, so long as you're not being marked for in-person attendance. But that's kind of where that understanding comes in for what needs to be slightly adjusted for your improvement and what just isn't benefiting you at all. Another thing to consider with your strengths and weaknesses is what you personally are like in studying. So maybe you'll realize one of your weaknesses is that you're not a morning person at all. When you wake up first thing in the morning, the last thing on your mind is memorizing like a chapter's worth of notes. You want to give yourself time to relax, maybe. So consider the times of the day that you are most alert. So if you're like this, maybe your best studying is done mid-afternoon or closer to night, things like that. And in addition to that, are you someone that likes to do work in huge chunks so you can just focus on one thing at a time? Or do you like breaking it down to smaller pieces in order to kind of not overexert yourself? This is less so directly strengths and weaknesses, but more so an understanding of yourself and how to implement it into your study strategies. So we want to give you guys about 5 minutes to kind of brainstorm your own personal strengths and weaknesses. You can do your last semester or your last academic year. It's entirely up to you. So yeah, we'll start the timer now and you guys can go ahead. Okay. You're not expected to have finished all of it. Ideally, you should go completely in depth. So you can do that on your own time later on, just to get an understanding of what it should look like. Another thing I forgot to mention was it's good to create a time frame when it comes to implementing your new strategies. So maybe I'll attempt this for the rest of the semester, things like that, just to understand yourself. So now we've done that, we kind of want to create the distinction between rigid and fluid scheduling. Rigid is kind of the more typical idea of scheduling that I'm sure most of you are familiar with. It's kind of dividing your day into hour long intervals. However, this is adjustable based on what you think you're better at. In a previous presentation, I think someone mentioned 20-minute intervals work best for him. So if that's how you work, that's completely fine. Since it is a very popular study scheduling strategy, you can find many templates for free online, or you can even create your own. However, there is one created by the Academic Advising and Career Center that is very helpful. One thing we did want to note before we go into fluid scheduling is that when it comes to your scheduling, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to be entirely rigid or fluid. There are always going to be aspects of the other in that type of scheduling. So in rigid scheduling, it's very difficult to plan your day down, like down to the absolute second. I think later on Sophie will mention the idea of incorporating buffer time to kind of allow yourself that shifting between topics. However, rigidity is very helpful and necessary as a university student because there are many things not in our control, like synchronous lectures and tutorials, or midterms and exams, assignment deadlines. Things like that, just to kind of get a concrete idea of what you should be working towards, both as this in the semester as a whole, or on a weekly basis. As for fluid scheduling, this is kind of probably what many students do use. However, it's less of a strictly scheduled, it's more of a strictly scheduled version. So if you're not someone that likes forcing yourself to do something at every single time of the day, you can start off by kind of looking at the syllabus of each course. If you're taking a full course load, you'll be doing this 5 times or for however many courses you have. Read it thoroughly, which you should be doing already, but gain a thorough understanding of the course requirements. This is kind of just obviously midterms, deadlines, things like that. But in addition, kind of what you think you'll need to succeed in that course. So that's the personal study needs section. So if the course has maybe 3 separate term tests instead of like a midterm or a deadline, and you know that they're all only going to be for that material. So I have a midterm today and it's only for the first 4 chapters. Based on that, what I've tried to do is look at the course material. I know that each week represents 1 chapter and 1 lecture. And based on my study needs, I know that a certain chapter will take me about 4 hours altogether, typically, because I know that I tend to zone out a lot in reading, or I tend to focus on unnecessary details. So I've given myself extra time. I know that 4 hours of just reading is very difficult and tiring for my brain. And if I force myself to do that, I end up going over or not completing what I wanted to do. So I break it up over time. But based on those personal study needs at the beginning of the semester, I gain that understanding of how much time I plan on spending for each thing. So I know that reading should take about 4 hours and watching lectures should just take about 2. That doesn't even include review. That's just a normal week's worth of courses. And then based on that, I kind of add up how many hours I plan on spending for the course. So maybe if I think a certain course is going to be about 15 hours of work a week, I'll kind of create that. And at the beginning of the week, based on how fluid you want to be, you can either say, all right, I have the knowledge that I have an essay due at the end of this week. So I'll kind of just do X amount of hours until I feel like, based on how I feel like, in order to ensure that I've still had all my work completed by Friday. Or if you want to be slightly more strict with yourself, you can say, all right, I plan on doing exactly 2 hours on Monday, exactly 3 on Tuesday, and so on. If you don't want to be entirely rigid, you don't have to force yourself to do that, but you do need to be able to hold yourself accountable. Here's kind of a sample calculation for what fluid scheduling may look like. The example here is from a course I took last semester. The entire column on the left is taken almost verbatim from the professor's syllabus, and the things I wrote in the brackets are what I personally wrote or thought for myself. As you can see at the bottom, there are things that are out of my control, such as the synchronous lectures, which occurred every Wednesday at a set time, and the synchronous tutorial, which occurred at a set time. And rarely ever, the professor may sometimes go over or under, but for the most part, it does stick to being about 1 hour for each. But you can also see other things where I took a moment to understand how I would learn best. So that section on completing the assigned readings, taking notes, and watching the necessary videos that the professor posted for the understanding of course material, I assumed would take about 3 hours weekly. I wrote this in September before the course had actually begun. It ended up being a lot more than that, which is why that fluidity is kind of nice. You'll allow yourself lots of flexibility. That column on the right is kind of, since Fluid scheduling is very difficult to hold yourself accountable, even if you're not, especially if you're not an extremely disciplined person. It's good to get a general idea of when you plan on doing certain things. This doesn't mean, all right, at exactly this time, I'm going to be doing this work. It's just, all right, on Wednesday, I know I'm going to be completing 2 hours. And on Friday, I know I'm going to be attempt to complete 5 hours. Again, this was unrealistic since it was at the beginning of the semester. It ended up being like a lot of the work on Friday and then a lot of the work on Saturday as well. And then based on kind of that addition, I ended up thinking that this course would take about 10 hours. Like I mentioned 3 times now, it was kind of unrealistic, but this is in general, no matter how much calculation you do, there's not much to prepare for when maybe an assignment or essay or midterm is happening and you suddenly that 10 hours becomes 20 for that course. You have to know that the 10 is kind of that baseline, so the general expectation for that course. But if you go over and maybe even sometimes under, that's like completely fine. At the bottom, I also wrote in brackets out of 112 hours. That's with the 8 hours of sleep a night estimation. However, we do know that's highly unrealistic for university students. But what we do want to stress is that consistency is key. If you know 8 hours of sleep isn't realistic for you, which is most university students, maybe let's say you know that on average you'll get about 5 or 6. The good thing is to kind of be very strict with yourself on maintaining that specific amount of sleep and then hopefully on weekends making it up, because while that fluid scheduling technique is good for people who don't like being entirely strict with themselves and doing every single thing at an hour a day, we are at home in the middle of a pandemic and it's very easy to kind of lose sight and control and spiral over everything if you don't have any semblance of an actual schedule. So if you know that you're a night owl and you'll always go to bed at 1 a.m., that's fine as long as you can consistently stick with waking up at 8 a.m., like half an hour before your lecture. That way you're still getting like a consistent 7 hours of sleep a night that you can even get more of on the weekends. Any questions so far? You can turn on your mic or type it in the chat. That's completely fine. I think we'll continue, if that's okay. And if you do have anything, you can mention it in the chat. So we also did want to talk about some examples of study strategies. This may not strictly seem like it's part of time management organization, but based on the types of courses that you're taking, it's a good idea to understand the types of study strategies you'll be using for that course and incorporating that into your schedule. So spaced repetition is a very popular study technique. I'm sure you guys have heard of it. If not, I'm still going to explain it. It's kind of the anti-cramming studying method, where the example here is it employs something called the forgetting curve, where essentially because memory decays over time, you're teaching yourself something before you can forget it. Because of this, it's not something that you can do like the week before an exam. It's more review that you can do over time. So as you create your notes for a certain course, you'll create those flashcards. If you choose to do an online software, I believe Anki is the most popular one. It's everywhere except for iPhone, I think. And an iPhone is very expensive, but Tiny Cards is only on iPhone. But if you're someone that hates that sort of digital use and you prefer that kind of tangible flashcards, you can do the example here. This slideshow will be sent to you guys, so you can click the YouTube link later on. But here you kind of just separate your flashcards into 5 sections or more or less, if that's how you choose to do it, just hopefully a minimum of 3 maybe. And kind of divide it up based on how often you plan on studying the material. So as you can see here, box 1, you teach yourself to review it every single day. Box 2, every other day. As you master material, it goes down into the next box. The moment you mess up, it goes all the way back to box 1. And that's the same kind of technique employed by Anki and Tiny Cards. Now, the interleaving technique is less like spaced repetition in the sense that spaced repetition is good for review that occurs over the entire semester, just to make sure that you have an understanding. Interleaving is more for review right before your assessment, so before a midterm, final, and so on. The reason interleaving can be helpful for review is because usually when we study, we tend to follow the exact same order that we were taught. So I'm using my personal example for the midterm I have today. It's the first 4 chapters. It covers the first 4 chapters of the textbook and the first 4 lectures. I've only studied so far in that exact same order. However, to properly use the interleaving technique to review, you would kind of do that switched up order. So chapter 4, 2, 3, 1. And this is sort of I know that a lot of people, when creating cue cards, they kind of memorize it in the exact order that it is. And based on that, it's difficult to discern whether you understand it only because it's in that order or because you genuinely understand the topic. With interleaving, it kind of mixes it up to ensure that you really, truly understand what you're learning. And On top of that, if your professor, which is most university professors, if your professor is the type to kind of use critical thinking questions, dragging material from chapter 4 to chapter 2, and making those huge jumps that you'll be like, that wasn't in class, it's a very good way to get yourself to think critically and connect material that doesn't seem like it has any connections. So you can create practice questions for yourself with this interleaving technique. And now I'll switch it over to Sophie.
Thank you very much, Kother. Can everyone hear me? Just like if you could give a thumbs up in the chat. Great. Okay. Thank you, Kother. So definitely those are some strategies that you want to employ when you're organizing your time, as they will help you to be more efficient in studying. However, now I want to sort of switch the discussion over to something that you want to avoid doing. And what you want to avoid is a cognitive bias called the planning fallacy. The planning fallacy describes our tendency to underestimate the amount of time that a project will take us to complete. Why do we do this? Well, there are three main reasons why. The first is that sometimes we can feel embarrassed about asking for a lot of time. So this would be especially pertinent in situations where someone else is holding you accountable to completing your project by a certain deadline. So maybe you're in a group, maybe you're like working with your peers in a group project, and one of your classmates wants to know how long you will need to complete your portion of the project. You might feel embarrassed about asking for a week, even though a week is realistically what you would probably need. And for this reason, you might, sort of be biased towards saying, oh, I only need 4 days, because you don't want to make that other person, look down on you or whatever. Another reason why we can engage in the planning fallacy is that we tend to only plan for the best case scenario. So oftentimes when we are thinking about how long it's going to take us to do something, we do not take into consideration the possibility of obstacles popping up in the future that can derail us from our progress. And finally, a third major reason why we engage in the planning fallacy is that we tend to refuse to make major adjustments to our plans, even when major adjustments are necessary. So in other words, when we make an initial schedule, sometimes we get anchored to that schedule. And as we progress through the future, and maybe we realize that the schedule that we originally created is not going to work out anymore. With that realization, we can still be sort of hesitant to change what we originally planned. And this can result in us not adjusting our schedules to incorporate the extra time that we might end up needing. So if we go to the next slide. Okay, great. Thank you. On this next slide, we're going to talk about how to overcome the planning fallacy, because obviously this is a very disruptive cognitive bias that I'm sure no one wants to engage in. So how do we stop engaging in it? Well, one of the strategies that you can use for overcoming the planning fallacy is to consider your past. Even though planning is essentially an activity of looking into the future, your past provides you with valuable insight into how long it takes you to complete projects, because it's basically a reservoir of projects that already happened and how long it took you to finish them. So whenever you're sitting down to plan an activity, you want to ask yourself, have I completed this activity or a similar activity before? If so, how long did it take me? And using that information about your past history of time and how long it takes you to complete that task, that will give you a baseline for estimating how long it will take you to complete it again in the future. So obviously this would require you to maintain some sort of record of how long it takes you to do things. And there are a lot of programs that will help you to do this. Online, you can use like Clockify or ClickUp, which are computer programs that have built-in timers. So they will allow you to sort of input a project and then record how long it takes you to hit the finish button, basically, on the program. Also, if you prefer a handheld version, the ANCC does have a task planner that is essentially the same thing. It basically just allows you to keep a record of what sort of obstacles tend to pop up, and how long it typically takes you to complete your to-do list. So you can look into that if you want to overcome the planning fallacy. We also encourage you to set goals with implementation intentions. So there is some research to suggest that when you're setting goals, if you think about precisely how and when you are going to achieve those goals, then this can help you, I guess, ground yourself more in reality and just make a more realistic prediction of how long it will take you to achieve the goal. Finally, other research does suggest that we are better at estimating the amount of time that it will take us to complete small projects than we are for large projects. So whenever you are faced with a project or a large task, it would be a good idea to try to chunk it into smaller subtasks. And instead of assigning sort of a net due date to the whole project, instead, try to estimate the amount of time that it will take you to complete each subtask, because those estimations are likely to be more accurate than the estimate you would have generated for the project as a whole. The UTSC assignment calculator, oh, sorry, I was just saying the UTSC assignment calculator will do this for you. So basically you just, you go in, it's a website, and you input the kind of project that you want to work on, and the assignment calculator will divide the project into subtasks for you, and it will also assign due dates to those subtasks. Keep in mind that that is just a template. The calculator is a robot. It does not know the specifics of your personal project, so you might have to make some adjustments, but it is a good template to use if you are unsure about how to go about this chunking activity. Are there any questions so far? Okay, great. Okay, so as I said, one of the reasons why we sometimes engage in the planning fallacy is that we neglect to take into account the possibility that obstacles can come up while we're trying to get our things done. And we are not psychic. We cannot see into the future and see all of the obstacles that are going to arrive. However, to a certain extent, it is possible to plan for some common interruptions. So for example, say you anticipate becoming bored with the tasks that are on your to-do list. To plan for this, you can try scheduling time before and or after the tasks to reflect on them and develop intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation occurs when your drive to complete the task comes from within you and not some sort of external reward. So basically, you want to complete the task because you just want to complete it. It's not because when you finish it, I know you're going to get a prize, or you're going to, get a cookie or whatever. And intrinsic motivation is more powerful than extrinsic motivation, which is that reward-based drive. So definitely reflecting on tasks and asking, like, why is this task personally meaningful to me? What am I going to get out of it? Questions like that can help you to develop intrinsic motivation and make the tasks less boring, hopefully. You can also try completing your most boring task first, or planning to intersperse your boring tasks with breaks just to make them more bearable. If you anticipate becoming tired, this is something that you can resolve by planning to take regular breaks or exercise, because this usually increases our alertness. However, in the long run, you also want to make sure that you are establishing a regular sleep schedule. Kother already talked about this, but I'm reiterating it again because it is important. Ideally, you do want to be trying to going to bed at the same time each night and getting up at around the same time each morning, because otherwise you just throw your body off, and it just gets really hard to sleep. You also want to keep in mind that no one just switches from work mode to sleep mode immediately. You are probably going to need time to physically and mentally relax before going to bed. So definitely try to account for that when you're planning your nighttime activities. Finally, to a certain extent, it is possible to plan for external disruptions. External disruptions are disruptions coming from stimuli outside of you. So for example, a family member coming to your bedroom door and, I don't know, asking you to clean the living room or something like that, the Wi-Fi going out. These are all examples of external disruptions. These are hard to plan for. So don't expect yourself to, just foresee all of them. However, when it comes to like other people, using apps like TimeTree or some other way of letting your household members know what your work schedule is, this can be helpful in hopefully discouraging them from bothering you when you're trying to get your work done. Also, you might try incorporating buffer time into your schedule. So this is 1 to 2 hours where you each week where you do not have anything planned. And this acts as a safety net. So if during the week external disruptions cause you to lose 1 or 2 hours, luckily you will have those extra 1 or 2 hours of buffer time that you planned to get your time back and finish your project on time. So, okay, great. So what we've talked about so far are very useful strategies for enhancing your planning and time management abilities, but they're not really going to be useful to you if it is not even mathematically possible to get done everything that you want to get done. So there is a link. We're not going to follow it because we don't have time, but in the presentation that you will get, there is a link to an online self-assessment that you can use to sort of gauge how long you spend sleeping, eating, commuting, in class, all of your weekly activities, how many hours you dedicate to each. And then at the end, it will tell you how many hours you have left for your homework, basically. We recommend that you have room for at least 2 to 3 hours of studying for every 1 hour you spend in lecture. If you complete the self-assessment and you realize that you do not have that much time, what we advise you to do is go back to the self-assessment and figure out what your lowest priority tasks are, and try to figure out ways to decrease the amount of time that you spend on those lower priority activities. And then next slide, thank you. Okay, so at this point, we've pretty much covered the theory of planning. Now we're going to move on to how to perform the actual physical act of planning out your day and your week. So there are a lot of virtual journaling techniques that you can use, such as Google Calendar, Microsoft Outlook. These are all online apps that will act as planners. Personally, I use ClickUp. As I already mentioned, it has that feature where it will record how long it takes you to complete a project, which is very useful, a very useful tool for overcoming the planning fallacy. So that is, yeah, that's what I use. I really like it. I encourage you to check it out. However, if you don't like ClickUp, there are a lot of other online platforms you can use to journal. And if you don't like being online at all, that's fine too. Kother is now going to take you through the process of bullet journaling.
So thank you, Sophie. I'm sure you've all heard of bullet journaling. However, since this is an academic presentation, we won't be talking about that kind of artistic perspective. The basic supplies are just any size notebook and with a grid or dotted grid and a pen. And if you are into visuals, you can find many YouTube videos online on how to decorate it. However, the beauty of the bullet journal over maybe just some random planner from Dollarama or Walmart is that you have complete control over how you choose to organize it. If you are a rigid scheduler, you can even put in your rigid schedule for the semester. However, we've kind of divided it into 3 crucial sections. The first is the least academic. It's just your year in review. This is more so just to get a general understanding of your personal scheduling. So doctors or dentist appointments, gatherings, fun stuff, anything big that you kind of will know, I can't do anything on this day, or I can have to work things around based on this day. That's kind of just all covered in the year in review. Now, the monthly spread is kind of to get those concrete academic dates down. So even if you are a fluid scheduler, you have to kind of get that rigid knowledge of what needs to be done. So this is synchronous lectures and tutorials. Even if you're taking asynchronous courses, it's very difficult to stay on top of course material if you're just doing it whenever you feel like it, especially if the course is only just a midterm and a final. You'll be completely blindsided realizing you completely missed all the material and it's already the midterm. So if it's asynchronous lectures, then it's good to get a rigid idea of when exactly you want to be watching those lectures. In addition to assignment deadlines, essay deadlines, midterms, and finals. And if your professor is the type that kind of has weekly worksheets or assignments due at a certain date, then it's good to put that in your monthly schedule as well. In addition to this, we mentioned those previous studying techniques. You don't have to use those. Again, like we mentioned with looking at the syllabus and understanding your course, there are many other study techniques that you can use and incorporate, but this monthly spread is kind of to pinpoint the exact days you plan on doing certain things. You don't go fully in depth with the material you'll be covering on these dates. That's more covered in the weekly spread, but the monthly spread is to get a general idea of the work you'll be doing each day and how you plan on organizing your study techniques. In addition, we want to talk about kind of looking at the semester in review. So Sophie already mentioned the beauty of creating SMART goals. However, we did want to highlight the benefit of creating a SMART goal or multiple SMART goals for the semester as a whole. You can choose to do this for every single course you're taking, and make it more academic in nature, such as I plan on, or I hope to get 85 and up for all my courses. That's completely fine too, so long as you use those SMART techniques. But since we are also talking about academic improvement in terms of study strategies and time management, you can also make it pertaining to your general study skills. So maybe you're someone that never watches the lectures on time and only ever watches all of the lectures maybe an hour before the exam on 2 times speed. Maybe your SMART goal could just be attending all the lectures on time in class, or continually attending office hours. Or a SMART goal could be talking to the professor more, things like that. Anything that kind of directs your learning and planning for the semester, so you have a concrete idea of what you hope to achieve for the semester. Now, the weekly spread is kind of going further deeply into those studying timelines, but more in depth. Like I mentioned with the fluid scheduling, in estimating the amount of hours you hope to complete per the week. At the top of your weekly spread, you can kind of write, all right, this course 10 hours, this course 15 hours, and so on, and then plan it out as you go along. In this, you can be slightly more rigid and say, okay, at exactly 6 p.m. to 4 to 8 p.m., I'm going to be doing this. Or if you want to be more flexible with yourself, which is, I guess, the beauty of the weekly spread, you can kind of just write the exact task you want to do, how much of it you want to do, like Sophie mentioned with breaking down bigger tasks into smaller bits. Maybe you are spending the entire week reviewing for your midterm at the end of the week. You could say, all right, Monday, chapter 1, all I plan on doing is rewatching the lecture, taking notes, posting on the discussion board so the professor can respond to my questions, and reviewing my flashcards. And then on the side, you can write in brackets how much time you plan on taking for each thing, and then you can tally it up if you'd like, or kind of just look at it in that order, sort of. Based on that, you can either choose to order it in how you hope to do it alongside the exact time you plan on doing it, or kind of doing it as the day goes along. Whatever works best for you is completely fine, so long as you know you'll be getting the work done. And again, this is where you can be flexible. If you end up not completing a task that was about 2 hours, you can just switch it to the next day, and so on. Here's kind of an example of what a weekly spread would look like. You don't have to do it exactly like this, but you can see how much space there is to write out exactly what you should be doing with your studies. And that task column on the right side, bottom right side, is kind of either we could put the amount of hours you plan on spending for each course that week, in addition to what big assignments you have for that week.